Hello and welcome once again to Lard TV, where we have another build project that we're going to do for you. After the Blacksmith's build project from Dark Ops, I had a lot of people contact me and said, thanks, that was really informative, but all that stuff about the yard was a little bit of a masterclass. Could you just give us some advice on basically how to make a simple MDF building look a little bit better than a simple MDF building? So I thought it would be a good idea to just get one model and do really quite a minimal amount of work on it, just to try and still get that feel of something unique and a little bit special. So the building I chose was from Sarissa, and it is their World War Europe railway station, which is a lovely model. And I realised that the reason I chose this is that it really is very, very typical of railway stations right the way across Europe. This could look very much at home in France, but equally I was out in Poland last year and saw this railway station, which frankly is almost identical. So I really felt this would be a fabulous piece to add to the collection, because it can pretty much do for anywhere across the whole of Europe and into Western Russia. Now, obviously, when you get a kit like this, you're likely to get instructions, which it's important to read and follow, because that tells you what's going on. But the thing to be aware of initially is that you shouldn't put everything in place. Now, I've built this model, but the things I've left off are external window shutters, which obviously when we're going to be plastering the walls, we're going to want to apply these on top rather than having to try and plaster around them, which simply doesn't work. So I've built it up to the point where we can start doing it up, and then we're going to do that, and we're going to have a look at some fairly simple techniques. We're going to go with the plastering. Now that's quite an interesting one, because this model has got some really lovely brickwork details, and what we don't want to do is go over them. The other thing that we want to do is to have a look at this platform. We can see that the platform is nicely done there with slabs, but I think we can add to that to make a little bit something a little bit more special there. And finally, we're going to be putting a roof on the building in terms of adding tiles, because that wooden roof is fine, it's very nice. But of course we've got what I always call the Waterloo farmhouse effect, where you've got those very visible lugs in the roof. And I left that unattached because I want to get some access for plastering in there. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, so that's really our starting point. The first thing then to do is going to be to put some plaster on. Now, as I mentioned, the big issue here is all this fabulous brickwork. There's two ways of doing it. You can try and plaster up to it and avoid it, but you tend to get something looking very, very wonky. Alternatively, you can mask it off so that you can then put the plaster on and peel it off. Now there's two ways of doing that. I mean, you can buy this stuff. This is from Tamiya. This is a masking tape that you can use on plastic models. But what I want to do today actually is use sellotape, because to be honest, let's be frank, if you're not really into modelling, you're probably not going to be having an awful lot of this stuff around, whereas the chances are you'll have some sellotape in your house. So my first job is going to be to mask up that brickwork, which is going to involve a little bit of delicate work. In some places it's going to be pretty simple, where you can see those straight edges there along the side of the building, but some of this intricate brickwork around the windows is leading me to think maybe I've chosen the wrong kit to do this with, but nevertheless it's a challenge, and that's going to make it interesting. So we're going to get cracking with this. I'm going to take the roof off, in this case 3 roofs off, to make it more accessible. And while I do that, I might think about what I've got on Audible. Have a bit of a listen to that. Okay, I'm going to start with the really easy bits, which are the straight lines, where we just line up the edge of the sellotape. Might be best to do this on the side actually. Yeah, where we just line up the edge of the sellotape with the edge of the brickwork and push it down. And what I do here, I don't know if you can see this, but I loop the top of the sellotape around so it presents basically a quick pull mechanism. When I want to take that off, I'll just whip that off, and it stops this bit of the sellotape at the top getting stuck to anything else. So the sticky bit ends where the sticky bit has to end. So I think I overdid it a bit with that amount of sellotape, but nevertheless it's not the most expensive product in the world. So let's go again, just using the edge of that brickwork to line it up, and then when I've got that in place, fold that over for the quick release. And there's two edges. For the bottom edges, very similar, but you can't really have an overlap at the bottom, so I'm just gonna, what I'm gonna do is put that up and push that into there, but I'm then going to put it over, and so it becomes a continuation of that. So when I use that toggle at the top to whip it off, I'm going to take the whole length off in one go. Indeed, where I'm going to have fancy edges, I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to put the basic shape on, and then I'm going to add just a few little extra bits, which I've got a decent pair of scissors to sort out. Now, the only thing I would say is, and bear in mind that this is completely unrehearsed, is that clear sellotape isn't necessarily as visible as you get if you use something like a masking tape. It just depends really what you've got at home and what you feel like using. Okay, so there we have one side done, and what I'm going to do is just plaster this one side and then show how that works, or more to the point, how I hope it works. So, as we've seen in the past, tools I'm going to use for this is this artist thingy and quick drying polyfiller, and just going to mix that up on an old plate and apply that to this one side. So let me do that now, and in theory that should be good in a few seconds for us to just strip that off. Now, oh, that's nice. Sometimes these things dry up a bit, and that's come out really nicely. Now let's not pretend that what I've done is perfect. The round detail up there I found very, very difficult to follow, so I did as best as I could. So let's just put this on, see what happens. We're going to use exactly the same technique as we always use here, and we are going to apply this and then polish it up when it's damp. And then if we need to go in and take it off any areas, then we can just do that with some kind of knife. Well, on the positive side, it's going on nicely. Quite what the effect is going to be when we take off the masking tape, I do not know, because some of this detail around the top where the windows are curved is not very sellotape friendly. So let's see. So in some areas I'm just going to have to manually avoid going too close. There's two ways of viewing this. You can either say, well, the plasterers probably wouldn't have perfectly plastered up to the brickwork anyway, or you can say the plasterers would have done so, in which case the best thing to do is probably stay shy of that area. I'm just going to do this face first because I want to get this finished, because then I can take off the masking tape and that will then expose the other areas that I want to do underneath, because this masking tape is sticking over. So next thing I need is some water to polish that up. Okay, so getting our water, we're just going to polish up those areas of plaster. I'm actually just trying, I'm not really sure what to do with that top window, but we'll see how it comes out when we take off the stuff. And just having rubbed that over. It's probably too early to do this, but let's give it a go anyway. And we can see the desired effect where I should have left this longer, but even so we can see that we are getting the desired effect there, where we want to protect that brickwork. Let's carefully lift this off. Now, you can see that's slightly imperfect where I've shoved my thumb in it, but that ain't going to matter really. Had I left this a bit longer, it would have been a lot better. But I'm just going to use a sharp knife to push it out and away from the brickwork areas. But generally, you can see that there on that ground floor, and also at the top of the sides of the top floor, first floor, it's looking pretty good. So let's do a similar thing here. And lift that away. and again we can see that it's too wet, and where it pulls off we're getting some issues. But for wanting to plaster up to an edge, just shoving a bit of sellotape on the model, it's not a bad way to protect it. Let's see what we've done at the top now. This probably isn't going to be quite as good, but as I was certainly not able to create a circle. Now, had I been using the Tamiya masking tape, I think I'd probably done a much better job of that, but because I was using, just trying to use sellotape, I don't think that's too disastrous. I'm not going to touch that too much because, as I say, that hasn't really dried, but you can already see there that you've got an effect where you've got a contrast and a pretty neat line between the brickwork and the plaster, and that's the effect I'm going to continue working on this to try and achieve. Now we've taken the masking off here, I've got access to this, so this is what I'm going to do next. So again, you can see that what we've done there is we've managed to get a reasonable job at protecting that brickwork. Now, it isn't perfect, but don't bother about that. Perfection is a rarity in real life, as I know working with Nicholas, where there are some errors, that's going to be completely covered up with the different shades of paint we're going to use. Because obviously we're going to decide on a brickwork colour for going round the windows, and whether we use a sort of a grey slate colour engineering brick or whether we use a red brick. I've not decided yet. And then the plaster is going to be whatever colour we plaster it, and that change in colour is going to hide up any errors there, but what you are going to get is the three-dimensional look of something that has been plastered. And I think you'll agree that just by taking 5 minutes, and it literally was 5 minutes to put that on that side of the building, has created some pretty nice clean lines that's going to allow us to get a really good effect. So there we go, that's the first side of that. I've obviously got 3 sides to go, but I'm going to let that dry first because it strikes me as quite sensible. This is pretty quick drying, but I'm going to let that dry. Once that's done, I'm going to come back and start masking out all of the rest of the building, and then I will plaster that likewise, and we'll see where we get to with that before we move on to other bits of the building. Okay. So that's dry, and let's have a look at it. You can see it there, you can see it there, hopefully. I think it's done a pretty good job when you consider, yes, there are going to be imperfections. You're going to get a little bit of, polyfiller elsewhere, but ultimately it's not a bad job at exposing that brickwork, which, as we've discussed, we're going to hide any imperfections with a bit of paint anyway. Things to remember: firstly, when you're taking off the sellotape or masking tape or whatever you're using, you want to do it before the plaster is completely dried, otherwise the plaster might hold the tape in place. Now, one of the issues that creates is you can get these edges lifting very slightly where you pull the sellotape off. So what I've done is I've just very gently, with a very fine sandpaper, gone over these, and you want to be really careful, because what you don't want to do with MDF is sand out any of these details, but literally just a wipe over will take those edges off. If anything's particularly rough, you can literally just use a nail to rub that down, even when it's dry. And I've let this dry for 24 hours, so it really is pretty solid. The next phase is going to be in the joys of PVA. We can now put these on, because obviously we want to have the shutters on before we paint it. And we're also going to put roofing tiles on. Once again, I'm using roofing tiles from Bases. I'm using a scalloped tile here because I decided that I would probably go with a red roof for this. One of the reasons for that is that obviously there's going to be quite a lot of red brickwork on this. So in terms of continuity and tying the whole things together, it's good to have a theme going throughout. So if we're using red brick, it'd be good to have red tiles to go with it. Alternatively, I might just paint them grey. I've not quite made up my mind on that. It's a case of making it up as you go along, really, and that's the great thing about doing a project like this. There's a few other things I've been looking at which I've been thinking about how to enhance this model. One of the things I'm not overly pleased about is this platform area here. It is, I'm not bothered about what it looks like inside, because it's not a blooming doll's house. That's just going to be spray painted black. But these slabs here are vaguely a bit odd. So I'm thinking about potentially re-slabbing that whole area by just using card or even heavyweight paper, probably something like 150, 170 GSM. I'm also thinking about redoing this brickwork round here with the brick paper that you may remember from the Blacksmith build project. But on the other hand, I'm trying to keep this quick and simple and not overdo it, because I don't want to create a masterclass again. So maybe I'll just leave that as it is. The brickwork there is quite nicely etched and nicely defined, so there's maybe no need to do that. The thing that slightly disappointed me about the model is when you look round it, there's nowhere for a sign saying where the station is. And one of the things that you would expect to see on any station is a great big visible sign saying St Pancras, King's Cross, whatever. But even on a village station like this, you're going to be seeing a large sign declaring where you've got to on your journey. But there actually isn't wall space for that. Now that might be a bit negative, but actually in another way it's quite positive, because I don't want this station to be tied to any particular region or area. So that's probably as positive as it is negative. But there is some area for just small signs, which I think, you know, even if you looked at the front of it, you'd have something saying, you know, open 6 o'clock till midnight or whatever. So maybe we'll put some small sign on here. And the good thing about this kind of cardboard sprue is there's loads of spare cardboard on there that I can just cut out and use that to add. So I'm going to crack on with the PVA and do the roof tiles, very much as you saw me do it with the Blacksmith, and then put the shutters on as well at the same time. Let's do that. that is the roofs added. As you can see, what I've done is I've overhung over the edges, obviously at the bottom because that's going to be where the tiles are on display, but I've also overhung at the edges. I haven't attempted in any way to keep that tidy, and the reason being is now this is dry, we're simply going to get a pair of scissors and trim that off to get a completely neat finish. Okay, this is really very simple, but I thought it's worth showing it to you because it's very easy to think you've got to tidy up as you go, but you don't. You can just keep it literally that simple, so that you get the perfect finish. Now, don't worry too much about this top bit here, because we're going to be adding some lead flashing, which of course we're going to be making from paper. So let's just do this and get this finished. But as you can see, it's literally a case of just cutting through. Same with the ridge, to get that finished. Okay, now as you can see, that is not quite finished, because what we've got to add now is the ridge tile. Great thing about these sheets from wall bases is that the top line of each sheet is exactly that. It's a single strip, but with two sides. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to push that down on a flat edge. You can use a ruler for this. I'm just using the edge of the workbench here, just to get that neat. Once you've got the guiding line, I then go along it and finish it off by hand. Let's get that to get the best fold right along the ridge. Now we've got our roof, but with the ridge tile on. Once again, don't forget, when you've finished it, you have got to go over the whole thing. Well, you don't have to, you can do what you like, but I would recommend going over the whole thing with a watered down PVA wash, PVA and water wash, which will then really just tie the whole thing together and focus on those excuse me, focus on the edges as well, because you want to eliminate any weak points where those tiles could get knocked and come away from the model. So the PVA is quite literally going to solidify the whole thing and tie it all in, so that it's going to be robust for wargaming purposes. The thing to remember with the wargaming models is that they are for that. They're not model railways where they're going to be static and in situ the whole time. This is going to be something that's going to be handled a lot, it's going to be moved about, so you want to make sure it is as robust as possible. As you can see, it doesn't take a minute to do this final step, but it will add a lot of minutes to the lifespan of the model. Use a brush to work that PVA in at all points, so you know that you've got that done. I just use an old brush which otherwise I'd be using for dry brushing. So there we've got that, and let's do this final one, the flat roof, and then we'll let that dry, and then we will come back and look at the final flashing as we attach these onto the roof and do the flashing to get a finished model. While we're letting the roofs dry, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about one other thing, which isn't a case of really making anything or adding anything to this model, but it is a case of setting the scene, if you like. With any building, it's possible to just make it, paint it, put it on the table, and away you go. But the important thing is that to consider that how buildings actually are in real life. They are not, no building is an island. They're not something that just tends to stand there on its own. You tend to find there's other things that go with it, so things like dustbins, things like front gardens, vegetable plots, outhouses, especially in the mid 20th century. A lot of houses still had things like outside toilets. Certainly almost any house that's got a garden is going to have a shed somewhere because people need to cut the grass. So it's always a good idea to think about what's going to work with the model that you're creating to make it more plausible and make it look like it's somewhere that people actually live. And in a tactical game like a Chain of Command, where one figure is one soldier, it's very important to present a realistic tactical environment where these troops are going to operate. So things like garden fences, garden walls, hedges, and the general detritus of life that assembles old bicycles, things like that, maybe a car on a family drive, are really important to set the scene. Now with this, obviously we're talking about a station. And one of the things I noticed from Slug Industries was that they produce a resin pack of baggage. So you've got cases, you've got trunks, you've got hat boxes, you've got suitcases and the likes. And what I did was I got hold of a pack of those, and you can see here on our station platform that I've just generally and liberally scattered them over that. And I think you'll agree that attention to detail like this is something that's going to turn this model into something that looks a lot more interesting and a lot more plausible. So when you're building a building, do give consideration to ancillary bits that can really add a little bit of detail to your model. I'm not decided yet whether I'm going to stick them in place. I think I probably won't. I think what I'm more likely to do is put them on, cut out some rectangular bases from MDF and put them on there so they can go on here, but they're also usable for other things as well. So that's where we've got to with our model. Let's have a look at those roofs now they're dry. Alright, here we've got our roof that's going to need some flashing. You can see at the top we've got the edge there, which is from the tiles. These roofs actually fit flush in here, and as we want to be able to remove them, we're not going to be adding any flashing there. So all I'm doing here, I've just taken a piece of paper out the bin. I will trim off a strip about, I don't know, what that would be, sixth of an inch, 4 millimeters, something like that wide, and then just run the PVA along there and add that on. Snip it off again, and there we've got a much tidier looking roof. Run some PVA again, run some PVA over the top of that, tap that in, and you just use the brush to push it in place, because often what happens is your paper is going to expand when it gets wet, but by using the brush to put that in place, that will tend to make sure it maintains contact with the roof everywhere it goes. So there we go. Right, well there we are, we've got our roofs done, and we can now take them off to the second side and think about what else we've got to do on this model. You can see around the edges that you've got some areas of ground, so I've just got together a bit of sand, sharp sand, which I'm going to use to do that. I tend to like to put a little bit of sharp sand around certain edges, which is going to allow us to blend in the platform with the buildings. But before I do that, I'm looking at this platform, and frankly, whilst I can kind of see what it's meant to be representing, which is some kind of slabbing, I've not been happy with this throughout, and I think that what I'm going to do here is actually re-slab that. Now, two things to think about. One, I'm not entirely convinced that this would be slabbed. I actually think it's far more likely to be tarmac. However, that would probably involve putting a retaining line of curbstones around the edge and then just using a fine sand to fill in the middle. I do think from an aesthetic point of view, slabs might be better. So what I'm going to do is go with the slab, and to that end I've just got a cardboard box. This is a box of cheese biscuits. You could use a cereal packet or something similar. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out the size of the platform and then work out what size I want my slabs to be. Okay, so if I figure they're coming out 28 by 4.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this up and see what we can do. 4.5, I'm using centimetres for this, it's pretty small measurements. So centimetres just seems a little bit easier to work in than inches for something that's going this detailed. So I'm going to relatively carefully cut out the main area from this box, and then I'll look to mark that up. So 27.5, 28 centimetres by 4.5 centimetres. I think I'm going to go with slabs that are 1.5 centimetres square. The alternative is, I'll have a look at that and see, because that sounds a bit small. So I'll square it off. Actually, 1.5 centimetres, when you look at it, is pretty sizable for this. So let's get a straight edge and then knock that So what I've done with this one is I've created some half slabs, and you'll see when I lay these that I'm going to lay them alternatively at the start position. So we've got our two piles of slabs, half slabs, main slabs. Best way to slab is to work your way around the outside, so you're defining where the edge is going to be. So we'll start here, then we're going to work our way across the front. Now this is where our half slabs are going to come into things. Let's move this over here a bit so hopefully you can see. Best way to pick up slabs is with a brush. So start there. And there. So we're going to start at the front edge, because that is the leading edge that everything comes off. And anything smaller than that, we're going to have to cut in. So we've got a bit of a cut here, where we're going round the corner. And this is just a case of doing it by eye and working out what works. So that's not quite right. And again, imperfection is perfectly fine because we're going to be filling in some of those little gaps with a bit of earth and dirt. Right, so there we've got our first line. We're obviously going to go down there, but I'm not going to do that yet. And again, if we overhang, it doesn't matter, we can trim it off at the end. So let's start working across this front now. And this is where we're going to bring in our half slabs. Slabs are normally laid in a weave pattern, a bond pattern. So we have full slab, half slab, full slab, half slab, all the way across that front. So that we've got our edges defined, now it's a case of just filling in the gaps a line at a time. Now obviously we're going to need to do some kind of cut when we get to the very end. And the great thing here is that there's going to be some imperfection, which is exactly the look that we want, because perfect really doesn't happen in the real world. So leave those gaps, they're absolutely fine. It's going to give us an opportunity to put some weeds in, a bit of dirt and grit and rubbish on the platform, which is precisely the look we really want. So as we can see, we've got all our slabs in place. It's a pretty rustic effect, which is what we want. And now, as always, we're going to use a slightly watered down PVA mix to go over that and seal it all in place. Try and make sure you're working it into all the gaps between the slabs. Okay, so there we have that. Now finally, and this really is the last thing, we're just going to run our PVA around those edges and sprinkle on. I'll use this packet to catch the sand. Sprinkle on our sharp sand mix so that we're going right the way up to the edges. So that's going to allow us to blend that in. Doesn't matter if you get a bit of sand on the brickwork at the bottom, it's fine, because that blends the building in. Keep the door step free there. You can see the tiles there. Just so I'm not keen on those tiles, but in that situation they're absolutely fine. And we've talked about a bit of dirt around the edges. I'm just sprinkling that in there, and that's hiding that gap where the tiles rather imperfectly come up. But more importantly, it's also giving it sort of lived in look. Try and pinch out just a bit of sand here, right? You don't really want any rocks on there. And one or two places. Just add a little bit of dirt to the platform. Now, what we're going to be doing is letting that dry and then just washing over that with PVA, and then that's our building finished. So there we have it. That's the end of this part. In the next part we're going to be coming back and painting this and really getting it finished and ready to be put on the table. But I'm really pleased with it. You can see, actually, interestingly, you can see looking at this that the bits that we've added are all in white. The original bits in MDF are pretty much wood colour or that grey. So you can see that actually superficially we've added an awful lot, but it hasn't taken a lot of time or effort. I still keep thinking that maybe I could add brick wallpaper to this area here, but if I did that, I'd be opening myself up for having to do all these brick edges, and frankly, that would be very boring. So it's just going to be a case of painting that a little bit more carefully, adding a little bit of detail in terms of brick colour. But really pleased with this. Still a little disappointed there's nowhere for a sign. In a way, that window would be better replaced and have a sign for the name of the railway station, but that's just my obsessive nature taking over. To be honest with you, I'm far better off having a separate sign to identify the name of the station, because then we can tailor make it for any particular scenario that we're doing. I think this is a lovely model. I think the original Sarissa model was lovely, but I do think this is adding to it and going to make it look a lot more individualistic and a lot more exciting on the table. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. One or two people have asked if they could have some close-ups of the model rather than me waving it around like a demented lunatic. So what we'll do is we'll sign out with a few pictures of that model building so you can see it with a bit of detail. Thanks for watching. We hope to be back with the next part of this build program before too long. In the meantime, any questions, just put them down below. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you keep up to date with everything that's happening on Lard TV. For now, thanks for watching and look forward to seeing you soon.